Next, let's look at these extras, these different varieties of tool that you tend to drive with the same ratchets, even though you might say that these are bits, as in like we use on screwdrivers sometimes. Let's start with the most obvious. So here what we have is a set of hex drives. So you might use Allen keys, as we call them in the UK, or hexagonal drives. These are the socket versions of them. Can be very, very useful for access, because you can put this on a very long extension and work it, or just for speed. And because the hex part is quite short, unlike some Allen keys, they don't twist up. You can apply a lot more torque with them and give a little bit of impact to release things. And again, I've got some quite nice tools in this set. I've got Draper Expert and chrome vanadium tools. This is the 8mm, and these are usually marked H8, not on this particular tool, but if I pick a different one off for you that isn't a Draper Expert, here we go. That's the normal marking, H4. This is a 4mm hex. And again, if you wanted it, you could have a 1/8 H1/8. But metric is where I'm at. Then, and very important if you're a Jag person like myself, you want Torx. Torx is the most common spline form. You get this 6-pointed star with radiuses between the teeth, and you want a good set of those. And these are pretty universal in that they're marked up T, and then 30 is the size. 30, to the best of my knowledge, does not relate to any millimeter sizes. This is just a standard. So this set here, my smallest is a T10, nothing 10 about that, to a T50. I do have some larger ones, but they're kept separate because they never ever get used. Then you go to these things. These are spline tools, far less common, snuck into vehicles more, in my opinion, as something to deter the home mechanic, because I think the argument that they give extra drive because there's more contact area is somewhat negated by the fact that by the time you're manufacturing blind sockets with this shaping onto fittings, the accuracy of these little splines is ever more questionable. It's a lot easier to form that hex in a socket in a cap-headed bolt than it is this spline. But you know, I'm prepared to be wrong on that. They are snuck into a lot of stuff by Volkswagen. So if you're a VW fan, then these are very useful for things like your door mechanisms, rollers for sliding side doors, the latches and locks tend to be held in position with this, and quite a few things under the bonnet as well. Now, there's no particular convention, it appears. Now, I've got quite a low grade brand for this one, Husky. Husky does a job, never had a problem with them, but you can just kind of tell by the way that things are formed that it's not the most precisely made bit of kit, but very functional. And these are marked up M for multi-spline 12. And these do tend to represent something that approximates to 12 millimeters, for instance. And finally, you've got these. If you don't have these, just don't get them. Get them because you needed them. This is typically called a triple square or spline 2 tool, and again is something I think snuck in by manufacturers to stop the average Joe fixing things. But you can get them, and I've got them just because the need popped up, so I got a set. I didn't buy an expensive set because I knew I was going to use them probably once or twice, and these are marked S2, spline 2, but I think triple square is the actual brand or design. I actually do believe this probably does give quite good torque. These very square blades. It's kind of like the posi drive is to the Phillips, as I think triple square is to Torx, but they're just not used. I think it's actually about manufacturing the fittings is probably not easy. We switch back to the toolbox, and one tool you've got to have if you want to work on suspension or old cars is what's known as a breaker bar. Now, some people will have a huge selection of these in different lengths. My own opinion is get a really big long one, because if you're going to need it, you're going to need it for power. So the shorter ones, I think, are just, you've got ratchets made of chocolate and you don't want to put a lot of pressure on them. So I think when you need a breaker bar, you need something really significant. So I've got this one. It's a real cheap and cheerful. I think its brand is Tool Zone, something like that. It's made of chrome vanadium, so it's not chocolate. And it is just over 2 feet long, or 63 centimeters. And my advice is look for one with a decent diameter and look at the pin, because they're inevitably going to have a swivel in the end. This is the weak point. That pin has the potential to break, so the smaller side of the pin is related to the power you can apply using this tool. Now, I mean, this designer tool, they've negated the quality and strength of the pin somewhat by having this T-slot, which means that you're turning against the T-slot. So maybe this could fail by opening this slot up a little bit, or it would fail by the 1/2 inch drive square parting company with the rest of the tool. So you're also looking for a nice curved transition between this square and the base, but strength is what it's all about with this. Super duper brands I don't think are going to give you a lot over any super strong piece of metal made by anybody else. Definitely worth having a breaker bar. Very useful for undoing wheel nuts that have not been off in forever, suspension components which have never been parted, and if you live in the UK, then obviously the undersides of our cars can look like they've lived under the sea, and corrosion is a big issue. You need something big and powerful sometimes, in combination with an impact tool, impact gun, to rattle and apply massive leverage to undo or break off. And for my opinion, you know, people say it's because it's the break loose, that's what it's called, breaker bar. For me, it's like, I accept defeat, I'm going to use the breaker bar. If it breaks, it's fine. I'll drill it out, I'll remove it, I'll change it. This is going to move most bolts. Then we move on to ratchets. I've actually got a duplicate set in here because sometimes I'm doing jobs and I want to have two different size sockets loaded upon two tools, not to work at the same time, just to alternate between, and it's just frustrating. So I've got 2 in here, but this is definitely my backup set. This is the set I use. So I'll share with you these 3. And I've just brought out of my screwdriver drawer this one, just for completeness. This is a bit driver, but it is my smallest ratchet. It's a bit driver because it doesn't have a square drive on the end. It has a hole straight through it, which holds 1/4 inch drive bits, as in screwdriver bits or Torx bits. So there's a Torx bit, and that literally slips straight in there. And if you want to know more about this sort of thing, check out the screwdriver tools episode, and that's a very nice wearer tool. Now obviously the reason for having 3 is 1/4 inch drive, 3/8 drive, 1/2 inch drive. Let's have a quick look at them. Mostly what you're looking for in a ratchet is the same regardless of size. So just briefly on this one's a pretty decent quality tool. Why? Because I broke a couple of cheap ones. So this is a Halford's Advanced. I think they also market them under Halford's Professional. This is made for Halford's, which is a car parts outlet in the UK, by another tool company. I think I know who it is, but I'm not going to say it just in case somebody gets upset about it. But it's a decent manufacturer. So this is good stuff. It is guaranteed for life. And the features of it, it's actually got a replaceable mechanism, because he's got these screws here, which, yeah, it can be a bonus. You've got a nice metal switch to change from left to right hand drive, and you've got a socket release button. Come back onto that again. It's got no plastics on the handle that are going to break or make it look scruffy, so this is going to last quite some time, and has done. That's done really good service. Middle tool is actually a no brand cheap and cheerful, but this has lasted me years. Now I'm going to say some of that is because this is the one I use least. Small stuff, small socket, small ratchet. Big stuff, big. Middle ground, you know, I don't use as much, but it's there. So it's a bit cheap and cheerful. It kind of looks it. You can see things don't look as precise. But it does everything I want of a tool. It's got not such a pleasant method of changing direction, because you've got to hold the socket still while you do it. So not as keen on that. But it does have a little wheel you can turn, which does come in handy for starting nuts and bolts. And neither of my other 2 does. This doesn't have a socket release mechanism, but it's robust enough, it's done the job. I will replace this with better if and when this one breaks. And last but not least, my main tool, because mainly I use 1/2 inch drive, and for that I've got a very nice ratchet. So a top brand in my eyes, Wearer. So this is a German tool. It's very heavily constructed. It's actually not chromy. It's got a satin finish, which is really nice to touch and means you can grip it well even when it's oily, despite again not having plastic bits and bobs all over the handle that are just going to break off. It's got a beautiful direction change that you can do quickly with a fingertip at a distance without thinking about. It's got the socket release mechanism. So the following applies to all ratchets. If you're going to buy a ratchet, what should you look out for? First, just look for something that's not got things that are going to break off. Plastic bits and bobs on handles, unless they're very well done, typically don't last. Next, you do want to have a direction change button. There are other ways of doing a direction change, which includes the push through square. I'm going to show you one. It's actually on a torque wrench, but you get push through square ratchets as well. Here we go. So this goes that way, won't go the other way. How do you change direction? You push the square drive out this side and now it goes the other way. Right, so cheap and cheerful way of changing direction actually makes for a very strong ratchet mechanism. The pawl is very strong in these, but for use on a car in confined spaces, just irritating as hell, because sometimes you want to try to undo a bolt and you get it moving, it gets tight, and what you want to do is just bring it back the other way, then go the other way. That is a pain in the arse. You also want to be looking for, add visual aid, a ratchet that has a very small distance between poles. What does that mean? Between clicks. So one click on this ratchet is tiny. So if I want to go through 90 degrees, I will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, I think. 18, there or thereabouts, detents between 90 degrees. So this has got very, very small distance, but you have to turn the handle before you're actually doing proper work. You can hear it clicking. I'm not holding the socket very still, but the tiniest movement and you're making progress. Same and a much cheaper ratchet. Let's do 90 degrees. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 10 or 11, not really sure. It's night and day. Plus, you can see the slack before anything moves. So to get the nut to move, you've got to move the handle much further. So that's a key indicator of not so much quality, because strength can be quality as well, but finesse, resolution. Really nice tool is that small movement. And I mentioned the socket release mechanism. I can't stress how useful this is. This socket will not come off until I press this button. How does that work? The ball that's in there will sink and disappear when I press the button, and there is actually a little push rod pops out the end, which is part of the mechanism, but will push against the head of a nut if there's one in your socket to help remove. What does this mean? When you're working underneath the car, this won't fall off an extension, won't fall off a socket. When you're working at arm's length, you won't lose the socket or the extension down in the engine bay. This comes off when you want it to, and not unless. This has nothing, plus the ball doesn't really grip the sockets very well. This is forever slipping off. This has that same socket release system. So if you're buying a if you're buying a ratchet as a separate item, I would say don't be scared to take along to the store a decent socket with a detent groove in it. Now this one, I don't know how well this is going to show up, doesn't have a groove. It's just a plain square. This is a bad socket. This one has got a detent, so that's a little divot on all 4 sides of the socket, and that will allow this ball to fully engage with the socket. And just do that, and if you can pull it off real easy, walk away. It's not great. If it's got a release mechanism, make sure it releases easily, and it's doing a good job. I'll put some links to some of my tools in the description so you can have a look at what sort of prices they are. See, they're pretty decent ratchets. See, the Wera Zyklop 8004C 1/2 inch. They also do ones where the head swivels, bends here. Again, that's great as long as it's a good brand. If it's a poor brand, just expect it to be another place for things to fail and for more slop in the system, which is going to make the ratcheting is not as good. Just for your interest, my reserve tools are US Pro tools. They have served me rather well for a long time. I've always been aware of their shortcomings. The rubber handles, which seemed like a great idea early doors, soon get really quite messed up, and actually mean they're less nice to use. They do have these hanging holes, which I do like and have used on occasion. They do have this wheel which allows you to spin bolts to get them started without moving the handle. That's quite nice. The mechanism for reverse and forward is on here and is nasty. This is made of plastic, and it's degraded. The plastic has over time and got mangled, and it is just not easy gloved hand or greasy hand to use. It does have a push to release. It really doesn't move very far. The ball doesn't stick out very much, and it doesn't retract fully. So yeah, get what you pay for, I guess. But they're still more than good enough to be my reserve set, and I still use them.